Everything that we know about the Epstein case, the fact that you have British royalty, American former presidents, some of the most influential people in the world visiting this sex island. In the case of, Prince Andrew, certainly having dalliances with underage women, girls, in fact. You look at the scope and magnitude of that, and there's no way that something like that is going on without intelligence agencies being very interested and aware of what's happening. So if you're a British royalty, you certainly are being monitored by British intelligence. They're making sure you're not going to get kidnapped. If you are an American ex-president like Bill Clinton, you have the Secret Service and you have American intelligence keeping tabs on you.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 327, and Daniel McCarthy is back. He's the editor of Modern Age Journal and writes, you might see one of his columns in your newspaper. Smart guy, great, has a lot of good insights, and we're going to talk about the breakup of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It probably would have come eventually, but we're going to go into the hows and whys of why this happened. So how are you, Daniel?
I'm doing well, thank you.
It's great to talk to you again. Musk seemed to, I think Musk is very much anti-woke, so he obviously backed Trump as being the anti-woke candidate. Do you think that's where all this but I don't know how much Musk bought into his agenda, but what do you think Musk's motivation was for partnering with Trump in the first place?
It's partly that, and I think Musk wanted to see what he could get done with Doge, and that Musk really does want to restrain the scope of the federal government, and this was an opportunity for him to experiment with what could be done in terms of reform, and he found out it's actually kind of limited in terms of what you can do without having Congress entirely supporting you. If you're just, in the executive branch, or perhaps not even officially in the executive branch, that you can make some reductions to various kinds of bureaucracies and agencies, but really slashing the things that are the big ticket items for government, that requires congressional action. And I think Musk became very unhappy, of course, that congressional Republicans are big spenders who really don't want to get the federal government's scope under control.
Yeah, it really makes me wonder, Dan. I think most of them are big spenders. I think you have a few outliers. Obviously Thomas Massey, maybe Chip Roy, but outside of that, I think they might be as committed to spending as the blue team is. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if they're quite as committed, but they really just don't see any urgency in reducing spending and reducing the scope of government. So even if in theory they like the idea of a smaller government, it just doesn't have any kind of practical importance for them. And they're worried, of course, about being attacked by the media and attacked by the Democrats. If they cut any government program, then whoever the beneficiary is of that program is going to complain about it. And the media is going to amplify that complaint and create a public relations nightmare for the Republicans. So it's easier for them to just go along to get along, not make any cuts, and try to get reelected based on their appeal to conservative voters by lowering taxes rather than trying to restrain the size of government.
Yeah, that is something they're afraid of because if they fire one person, the media will say they fired 1,000. That's not. I mean, they exaggerate this stuff. And as one person said, "Look, if we're going to get accused of doing all this stuff, let's make sure we actually do it." But they don't seem to. I'm not really sure what they're afraid of.
Well, when it comes to firing bureaucrats, the American people will probably support you. Really, I don't know that they're that attached to USAID and to some of these other programs. Certainly, the media is doing everything it possibly can to try to, paint a rosy picture of all of these bureaucracies that just eat up taxpayer dollars. And they claim, of course, oh, if you don't have USAID, who's going to deliver, food to third world developing countries that are facing a famine? Well, in fact, of course, government has no money of its own, and there are plenty of private ways to supply those kinds of needs, as well as being, plenty of other governments in the world that can supply those needs if necessary. So I think the American people are not so worried about those kinds of cuts to personnel, but the Republicans are very worried that Americans, as a voting public, are going to be offended if there are any changes made to Medicare, Medicaid, or to Social Security. So the entitlements that are really the biggest, you know, elements in the federal budget, those are sacred cows, and they cannot be touched. And of course, there are other things too, like defense. Even though we have no idea whether we get any value whatsoever for the money that we spend on defense, because the Pentagon has never been audited financially, we continue to shovel money into defense and think that that's going to always make us safer and keep us safe. And Republicans don't want to cut that either, of course.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, how much power do you think these government unions have? This is something we didn't even have at FDR's time. In fact, FDR opposed government unions. But do you how much of a difference that? Not to mention these government unions. They're really the closest things to terrorists I've ever seen. The way they occupy those buildings in Wisconsin and stuff like that. I mean, how much of a difference do you think they make?
Yeah, they have a stranglehold, especially the school teacher unions wind up having a stranglehold on a lot of state governments in particular. They have a lot of power within the federal government as well, and government unions in general are very detrimental to the public interest. This is one of the reasons why Reagan was exactly right to fire the air traffic controllers. They were trying to use their union to have a strike against Americans' interests and having their ability to fly. And Reagan said, "No, you can't do that. You are, government servants. You are providing something that is necessary, and therefore you can't have this union, which is going to put your own private interest in trying to negotiate for better benefits or higher salaries. You can't have that, strike against the public interest and create a problem for the whole country." So Reagan was exactly right to stop to fire all these PATCO air traffic controllers, and firing other government union, employees is the right approach, because they are, I don't know if I would quite use the metaphor of terrorists, but they certainly are people who are able to extort a hell of a lot out of government and out of the American taxpayer.
Yeah, I don't. That word's used very recklessly. I don't use it lightly, but yeah, just, I know there was the. I mean, it wasn't in DC, but so anyway. So, do you think Musk had what do you think made Musk think this was possible, or he just didn't really know what he was getting into, or because maybe these people don't know what they were getting into?
Well, you have to find out by doing the research yourself, and that's what Musk did. He went into government and brought in a number of very talented young people who were actually looking at government expenditures. And I think the hope was perhaps that they would find enormous amounts of unpopular waste that they could get rid of without any kinds of political penalties. And instead, what they found is that there certainly is an enormous amount of waste, but really the things that are most responsible for adding this enormous federal fiscal burden are things that are popular, and that they're not waste, that they're actually the thing itself. Right, the actual government programs are the thing that are most expensive. And in order to get rid of those, you can try to do it within the executive branch, but to do it effectively you have to have Congress on your side. And of course, now it's shocking, but not only are the federal courts trying to stop measures that Doge put into effect, they're also even trying to roll back cuts to government that Congress has made. So recently, a federal court had said that no, you can't cut a Planned Parenthood funding, with this big beautiful bill that has just passed in Washington. That in fact this funding has to be restored. So the courts are so out of control that they will try to restore federal spending, even if Congress is the one. And of course, the Constitution is quite explicit that Congress is the one that is responsible for this. But even when Congress does it, the courts still don't accept it.
How can the courts just go in and do that? They because they don't have the power of the purse at all, and I don't know what their grounds on that is. That
Well, they
say
think they can get away with it.
do
So, I
something.
mean, we don't have a strong tradition of impeaching judges, even though we can do so. And we don't even have a very strong tradition of limiting jurisdiction for the judges, which, in fact, Congress, again, constitutionally has the power to wield. So, as long and it kind of works well for the political class to let judges have this much irresponsible power, because then, you can say, oh, hey, we tried to vote for government cuts. We really wanted to be good small government conservatives, but we just couldn't do it because the courts wouldn't let us. It's not our fault, it's the courts. And then, obviously, the courts don't have to deal with Republican primaries and voters. They are, they've got these life sinecures, so they can afford to be irresponsible, and that's how you can shift the blame basically for failing to restrain government from the politically responsible branches to the politically irresponsible branch of the courts.
Well, that's also what would have happened if Harris would have been in the White House. Well, we tried to cut government, but Kamala wouldn't let us do it. I mean, it would have been the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so Congress, one way or another, tries to find excuses, and Congress really is a pretty deficient institution right now. And unfortunately, it's very logical. They have very logical reasons for being the way they are in terms of what benefits their own reelection, and that's a problem to for conservatives and libertarians to confront. It's one reason why there's so much emphasis now, certainly by conservatives, but even by some libertarians, on the idea that you actually probably do need executive power, which at least is focused in order to break some of this impasse. Because if you have Congress do it, Congress, is so diffuse right now and is so concerned only about the short term and its own members' reelection that it just doesn't have the wherewithal to exert any kind of control over what actually happens.
This seems to be an issue with legislative bodies most everywhere, though they want to give up their power to the executive, and the Constitution says you have the power, but it doesn't say you can hand it off to somebody else. I mean, you either uh, is there any way we can fix this or not?
Well, we can keep trying, right? So certainly voters, if they're active in Republican primaries, they're able to replace one congressman with another. And you've got to actually organize and make these people feel pain. And again, they're responding to what they think is the path of least resistance in terms of getting reelected. And if you can change those incentives and show them that actually the path of least resistance is not simply going along with greater government, then you'd be able to get them to change their behavior. By the way, this is where I think Elon Musk both has great potential, but is also on the verge of making a tragic mistake. Rather than wasting money in starting a third party, Musk would be much better served if he took the same resources and applied them to the much smaller electorate within Republican primaries and used that to take control of the Republican Party at the level of primaries and getting people nominated for Congress in the first place. And again, if you go after a Republican incumbent in a primary, they take those threats very, very seriously, especially if you have, the kind of resources that Elon has. And that's the kind of thing that actually will get them to change their, behavior and to take notice of what's happening.
That's a good point. So if he tried to primary, say, Mitch McConnell or well, that's in the Senate, but still, uh, somebody in the House would probably be more vulnerable, but maybe it wouldn't be very hard. Yeah. And that's why, in a way, it seems like, Elon is just going to be another version of Ross Perot. Is that, I mean, is that a pretty fair comparison? I mean, I that was the first presidential election I voted in.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, I would say actually Elon should avoid the mistakes of Ross Perot. So Perot, he runs a very idiosyncratic independent campaign in 1992. Then he builds a political party, and it actually is a real political party. It's a significant force for a short time. The Reform Party, Jesse the Body Ventura becomes governor of Minnesota based on the Reform Party ticket. Perot then runs a second campaign in 1996 as a Reform Party candidate. And of course, in 2000, Pat Buchanan actually becomes the Reform Party nominee. Now, the trouble is, Perot builds a political party, but it doesn't actually have a party mentality. And so, one of the problems the Reform Party encounters from 1996 onwards is that Perot wants to continue to have full control over the party. He doesn't want to cede control to someone like Jesse Ventura, even though Ventura actually wins public office. He doesn't want to cede control to someone like Pat Buchanan, even though Pat Buchanan is a very credible candidate. Perot wants to maintain control and make the Reform Party his own sort of personal fiefdom. And as a result, it doesn't function very effectively as a political party. And also, why go to this trouble of creating a new party, which is now failing in the case of the Reform Party, when it's very, very expensive to do that, when you could just, if you took the same resources and used them within the smaller electorates and the smaller sandbox of a existing party's primaries. I think the Republican Party would obviously be the more promising one. But if you use that money in Republican Party primaries, you'd get a lot more bang for your buck and a lot bigger results. And basically, I mean, if Perot had a bit more of a big picture mentality, if he were able to work with if not Pat Buchanan, at least someone like Newt Gingrich. And I'm not a unstinting admirer of Newt Gingrich by any means, but Gingrich is someone whose ideas are capacious enough that there's an element where he could have teamed up with Ross Perot, and Perot's money could have
Yeah.
moved Newt Gingrich in a certain direction that would have been a little more Perot-like, and that would have been very effective within the Republican Party in its primaries and in shifting the party in a more fiscally restrained direction. But that didn't happen. And instead, you had these personality clashes between Perot and Buchanan, and you had Perot wanting to be a big man in a little party rather than being a big man within primaries of a big party, and then ultimately taking over that party. By the way, the great example of the counter strategy, which was much more effective, is of course Ron Paul. So Ron Paul, was a Republican congressman for a stint in the 70s and 80s. Then he goes and runs as a Libertarian Party third party
Yeah.
candidate, gets nowhere, and nothing really happens. He comes back and once again serves as a Republican congressman, and then he runs in 2008 and in 2012 as a Republican Party presidential candidate in the primaries. And then he actually generates an enormous amount of buzz. Even though he doesn't get close to being the Republican Party nominee, he does, popularize his agenda and spread his ideas much more effectively than he had before. And you have a network and a grassroots movement of activists who start supporting not only Ron Paul, but also more Ron Paul like candidates within the Republican Party. And that's what gets Rand Paul elected to the Senate. It's what gets Thomas Massie elected to the House in Kentucky. And there are others too, Justin Amash and a handful of others who get elected as Ron Paul Republicans at the federal level. There are many, many more Ron Paul Republicans elected at the state levels as well in state legislatures. So that's with
Yeah.
basically no billionaire backing. That's just Ron Paul doing it on the basis of his message. Well, just imagine if Ron Paul had billionaire backing, if Ron Paul and Elon Musk were teamed up in order to, have that kind of influence within Republican primaries, they would sweep the party, and they would not necessarily win the Republican, presidential nomination, but they would be able to take out so many Republican incumbents and really have a revolutionary effect on the congressional Republican Party.
How much do you think Elon was really just protecting his own interests? Because he's got a lot of government contracts. I mean, there's a lot of things I like about Elon, but I do acknowledge that, boy, this guy gets a lot of corporate welfare. It's, so is he really a capitalist or not? I mean, where do you think that plays in all this?
Well, it's an element, clearly, but at the same time, I think Elon actually does have a certain ideological or even just personal idiosyncratic drive. He's someone who likes to take on a mess and try to make it efficient and better, right? So, I mean, he did this with Twitter. He has the same impulse to do it with the federal government, and I think that's commendable. So, I actually think that's more of his motive than it is protecting his own interests, especially since, I think it was predictable even from the beginning of his relationship with Donald Trump that it might end badly. If you look at the first term, for example, Donald Trump wound up breaking up with a lot of people who served in his cabinet or who served as, various kinds of advisors. So having a political connection to Donald Trump can wind up ultimately boomeranging upon you and winding up damaging your relationships with the government. And I think Elon went into government knowing that. I think he knew that, this could end badly. Trump could get very ticked off at me, and this could actually wind up harming my business interests. And yet Elon did it anyway. So I think he had a generally selfless motive there.
Yeah, I think it may very well have been selfless. I mean, I also think Elon might be motivated by having seen what happened to South America, and he's thinking, I don't want that to happen here. It's
I think that's entirely plausible. And, obviously there are, problems connected to, the legacy of apartheid. There are problems connected with the ANC, which of course is a communist party, actually.
yeah,
Um, and, the economic dimensions, as well as, all the obviously, racial baggage that South Africa is dealing with. But simply as a purely economic question, what's been happening in, South Africa is an absolute mess. I mean, South Africa was, the most developed country in Africa, and yet, now it's a place where oftentimes major cities cannot keep the power on because, you have so much cronyism, just so much, socialism, so much corruption, and that actually can happen in America too. And I think Elon really does see that as being the path that we're on if we don't, start seriously changing things.
yeah, it's yeah. I mean, you can't. Uh, How much do you think Elon is really just a maybe a younger version of Trump? And you
I
know,
think there's some truth to that. And I think that's
yeah,
one reason why they can get along up to a point, but then, ultimately there can only be one, top dog. And Elon, at times has been the richest man in the world, much richer than Donald Trump. Trump, of course, is at the pinnacle of politics right now. So there's a sense in which they're rivals as well as being partners. And I could see that, there are many opportunities for them to have a falling out on that basis.
yeah, I can see that too. That Trump would be angry at anybody who had more money than he did, just for that reason alone. It's and Elon is still a lot younger. Either he or Bezos. It's possible that they'll become the world's first trillionaires. It's yeah. So and of course, Elon also had that situation where at least one of his sons got, or I think his son got, captured by the whole transgender mob. I'm sure that motivates him too. But
Oh, very much so. Yeah, no, that's clearly, part of his outlook and why he's opposed to wokeism and transgender agenda.
yeah, so where do you think we've also just coming off the whole official announcement that there's no Epstein client list and all this other stuff, Dan. Uh, you know, Epstein didn't kill himself seems to be the one conspiracy theory that almost everybody in America agrees on. So what do you make of all that? It's
Yeah, I'm not surprised, precisely because, everything that we know about the Epstein case, the fact that you have British royalty, American former presidents, some of the most influential people in the world visiting this sex island. In the case of, Prince Andrew, certainly having dalliances with underage women, girls, in fact. You look at the scope and magnitude of that, and there's no way that something like that is going on without intelligence agencies being very interested and aware of what's happening. So if you're a British royalty, you certainly are being monitored by British intelligence. They're making sure you're not going to get kidnapped. If you are an American ex-president like Bill Clinton, you have the Secret Service and you have American intelligence keeping tabs on you. If you're, an Israeli former prime minister, that as well is something that the Israelis and others are going to be keeping tabs on. So none of this is happening outside of the observation, at the very least, of a number of intelligence agencies. And you have Epstein in a position to record what's happening as these very prominent people are doing illegal activities. And once you have that kind of leverage, you're able to then, wield a lot of political and economic power. One of the things I think is very interesting about the whole Epstein situation is that the guy clearly was not the financial genius he presented himself as being. So he claimed to be, this brilliant genius investor who was making his clients, these extraordinary multiples of their investments. And there's no evidence that he had any kind of, tremendous financial ability. What he was actually doing is, presenting a scam where he said, okay, these are the returns you get. He gets these, very wealthy individuals interested. Oh, wow, that looks impressive. And this other wealthy guy says that he's getting good returns. So I'm going to go to your private island and, maybe enjoy myself and hear the case for your investment plan. Well, then it turns out that actually the investment plan is, hey, I'm not going to share your sex tape with the world if you invest the money I'd like you to give me, perhaps there's some investment here, but really it's about I'm taking your wealth now and I'm going to use your wealth. I'm going to extort your wealth in order to pay for my own operation. And again, this is something where when this is going on, even if it's a purely private venture, once you have these intelligence agencies aware of it, and once you have high political figures who are getting involved in this, clearly this is going to spiral into something which is, much more serious than just bilking billionaires out of their money. And of course, it's so fascinating to look at how I think it was Lou Wexner was the billionaire that Epstein originally bilked, and he was getting to live in Wexner's mansion, and was just getting enormous amounts of money from Wexner. And why? Why is Wexner just giving this guy all of this wealth? Well, clearly Epstein had some leverage over him. So if you look at all of this, and then you say to yourself, "Gee, is it possible that someone might get killed?" Over this? Is it possible someone might drop dead if they have, the goods incriminating all these political and otherwise extremely powerful and influential people, I'm not totally surprised that someone does drop dead without getting a chance to testify about this. And it's maybe a little surprising that Ghislaine Maxwell is still alive. And of course, her father, who had all sorts of ties to organized crime and to intelligence agencies, both British and Israeli. Her father, of course, died in an accident at sea, which a lot of people say was perhaps not so accidental. So, given all of this, I'm not surprised that the Trump administration isn't saying more about the Epstein scandal, because this is real deep state stuff that I don't think any administration would seriously tackle, because it would be too embarrassing to too many people, even if Trump himself's not incriminated by it, and I think he might not be. Nevertheless, the CIA and other agencies are probably not going to be too keen to let their dirty laundry get aired.
Yeah, I want to correct you. That's not Lou Wexner. It's Les Wexner.
Les Wexner, yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
he lives near. Well, I used to live in Columbus. He's the richest man in Ohio. Uh, Founded limited Victoria's Secret, other stores that's been big in retailing. Yeah, he's a, and of course, hey, Victoria's Secret models. It's like there you go. Yeah, so it's not. I mean, what would happen though if somebody say went to Epstein Island and said, "Hey, wait, I didn't come here for this," and they just get up and walk out, or are they kind of stuck in this blackmail ring? I mean,
No, I think the art of this, and you kind of see
yeah,
this also with the very parallel operation that Diddy, had going, and which he's now apparently been able to, I don't know if he's getting off scot free, but he's certainly getting out of the worst charges that have been leveled against him. But I mean, the whole thing is to control incentives and to sort of lure people in, or to rope people in stage by stage, so you don't have to use a lot of coercion, you don't have to use violence. What you do is simply say, hey, here's a party, here are these young women, and we're not talking about 10-year-old girls or anything like that. We're talking about 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds. They're young, they are tempting to these grown men, and these grown men, especially if they're stupid and arrogant and drunk, they may not, they're not being careful. They're not saying, wait a minute, if I have a affair with a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, that's something that could potentially be very, very dangerous and damaging for me. It's something that could be very much breaking the law. They're not thinking about that, so they do it. It's something that just follows the arc of human nature. And then if you record them doing it, if you get them on video, then you're able to say, wait a minute, okay, this would be very embarrassing for you. Luckily, I'm your friend. I'm not your enemy. I'm your friend. I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to leak this video for you. Instead, I just want to have you, do a few favors for me. Why don't you say that, I'm a really nice guy, and that some of your billionaire friends should invest their money with me? Or why don't you, maybe do one or two other things that are small? Think about how this kind of parallels the way that intelligence agencies, the KGB, the CIA, or anyone else, how they're able to, they get someone to do something that's slightly illegal. They get someone to take a little bit of money, or just just get a taste of what it would be like to betray your country. But they don't ask them to do anything absolutely crazy or dramatic at first. They don't even perhaps ask for state secrets at first. What they say is simply, hey, why don't you go and just take some photographs of the local power plant, or the local State Department office, and nothing even classified. Just go and take some photographs for me. And then once you do that, you wind up, your handler then says to you, well, hey, it wasn't illegal what you did, but what you did is probably, a little embarrassing. Maybe it's something you wouldn't want me to share with your employer. Maybe you should now go and photograph some actually secret documents for me. And so by stages, you're able to corrupt people and to give them a series of incentives that draw them deeper and deeper in, to the point where they cannot say no to you, and their entire lives would be destroyed if their secret got out.
that's true. Yeah. Who do you think was so Epstein was the boss of this, or who do you think was bossing him?
That I don't know, and it's you could speculate on practically any intelligence agency,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe organized crime. There's any number of things that could be involved here, and the trouble is, I mean, all these things have a certain overlapping, universe. I mean, one of the things that's notable about intelligence agencies that operate outside of America's borders is that I mean, by the nature of the work, you're dealing with scumbags and you're dealing with, criminals in foreign countries who can give you useful intelligence. You're dealing with, sort of the underbelly of, other countries. That's something that introduces you to a lot of people who may have criminal connections in your country as well. So even if you're scrupulous and you're trying to observe the limits that intelligence agencies are meant to observe between what happens abroad and what happens in their own countries, chances are you're making connections with some very shady people who are involved in bad stuff, both at home as well as abroad.
Yeah, and so many of these people, they might have a chauffeur, they might have a secretary, they might have a private pilot. I mean, they're all going to be asking questions. What am I doing here? It's
Oh, they don't ask too many questions.
they don't
So
have too
I
many
don't know. I don't know
questions.
if you've seen this, but there was actually a chauffeur. I think it was one of Epstein's chauffeurs who got tracked down by the media, and this guy had been very very quiet. He always said, "I don't say anything." I'm employed to keep my employer's secrets, and this is just not my business. Finally, someone is chasing him down, at a bar or whatever, and just says, "Come on, just say something." And he finally says, "Look, if I said anything to you, I'd be dead." So, and that's on the record. That's been
Yeah,
reported. So again, we're not. This is not patty cake stuff. This is, the amounts of money we're talking about, the level of political figures we're talking about. I would be more surprising, even if you're the most naive person in the world, it would be more surprising if there were not lethal stakes involved in this than if there are, right? So, I mean, that's my general look, even though I have absolutely no insight into exactly, who was running the show or how, what the operation was, what its point was, whether it was just, trying to bilk money out of people and gain, sort of blackmail leverage, or whether it had even more, extensive aims than that.
yeah, exactly. So where do you think Trump goes from here now? I mean, there's been I mean, I should ask so too. What do you think about the foreign policy?
Well, Trump has threaded a needle so far. Obviously, he made a strike against Iran that then ended the 12-day war that Israel had started with Iran. He didn't get drawn into something that seems to be an ongoing war with Iran. But there are, of course, folks both in government and outside of it who would like to see Trump much more involved with Iran and trying to generate regime change. So there's going to be a continuing pressure on him to do that, as well as to get, we're now having interesting sort of one step in one direction and then another step in a different direction with regard to Ukraine, right? So the Defense Department withdrew some of the support that was being given to Ukraine. Now Trump says he's going to restore that, and it's kind of an open question. First of all, which side is Trump actually, in terms of the policy, which is he going to follow? And then there's also the question of, is Trump being deliberately ambiguous? Is this, a little bit of both sides in order to keep both Ukraine and Russia off their guard and willing perhaps to negotiate and uncertain about what's in the future? So Trump has his own approach to these things, which defies any kind of ideological or simplistic pattern analysis.
True, but except for the midterms, he doesn't really. He's not going to run again, so he doesn't have as much to worry about. I mean,
I think it's just his own approach. I mean, this is how he likes to run things. And Trump, I do think he has a view to his legacy and wants to be seen as a president who uh, uh, brings about changes that are hailed as successes. And that would include, various kinds of peace deals. He was very proud, of course, about the Abraham Accords, and but could also mean, winning a war. Now, I think he's also shrewd enough that he recognizes trying to do regime change in Iran would be as bad, at least, if not worse, than trying to do regime change turned out to be in Iraq. And that, in fact, this is not something that is going to be a success if he undertakes it. So I think Trump is very reluctant to get drawn into something, the kinds of conflicts that George W. Bush got drawn into. So I think that's both, his personal view of things and also his calculation of his ongoing interest, even if he doesn't have to run for office again.
yeah. How do you think the midterms will be looking next year? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, historically, it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to hold on to Congress. They've got a single digit majority right now. They've got a majority of about 8 people, but that's only because 3 Democrats have died in office in recent months. So the Democrats, theoretically have, only about a 5 seat deficit they have to make up in order to take control of the House. So I think it's, Going to be very difficult for the Republicans. That said, I mean, Trump has racked up a lot of wins with the Republican base, and he's put Republican congressmen in a position that I think actually serves them much better than they've been served in the past. And that's true even with the big beautiful bill, which for all of the negative publicity it's received, it actually delivers on a lot of things that Republicans want, from more funding for the border, obviously tax cuts. If the big beautiful bill had not passed and taxes had gone up, the Republicans would be really facing a wipeout in the midterms, because any Republican voter, seeing that he's paying more taxes in 2026 than he paid in 2025, would be absolutely furious with Trump and with the Republicans in Congress.
That's yeah. That's I mean the tax cuts. Although I don't know how we can cut taxes when we're still not apparently cutting much in the way of spending. It's but we'll see how that plays out. Uh, obviously getting a little away from Trump. What do you make of what's going to happen in New York City this year?
Well, I don't have a great sense of electorally whether the current mayor, Adams, who is obviously facing legal difficulties and all sorts of other problems, and is now running an independent bid for reelection, whether he's going to be able to defeat Mamdani, or whether Mamdani, as the Democratic nominee, is just a shoe-in for election. But I tend to think that Mamdani, has the advantage right here, and I don't know that there's any sort of new candidate who can be put on the ballot at the last minute who'd be able to defeat Mamdani. So I think there's a very high likelihood that Zoran Mamdani is going to be the next mayor of New York City.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen like that. I mean, people are saying he's an outright communist, and it sounds like or maybe he's a democratic socialist, but he doesn't.
Yeah,
And
he's a
what does that
he's
say
a
for New York
young
City?
he's a young, quite left wing, economically very socialistic figure. Sometimes people have these, ideological profiles as candidates and then turn out to be rather different when they get elected. But all the evidence so far suggests that Mamdani really is as bad as he, is campaigning as being. So New York could be in for a lot of trouble. And of course, if he gets elected, a lot of New Yorkers will continue to flee to Florida. And right now, New York is facing a lot of difficulties because, from COVID onwards, you had this flight out of New York into Florida, especially a flight of wealthy individuals, and that's destroying the city's finances. And the city, it can't afford to have now a socialist come in and make life even worse for the rich, as well as for everyone else. You get a vicious cycle, which is going to really, tear the city down.
Yeah, I mean that's the question. If I mean if you've got a net worth of say $50 million, you can theoretically live wherever you want to live. Why would you live in New York City?
Yeah,
It,
I mean, it's the cultural capital, so I mean, it's got that attraction, and maybe you're plugged in with a social set there. Maybe you want to, hang out with stockbrokers or something. I don't know. Although I
It's
imagine if you had
just the
50 million,
stock
you probably don't need
exchange,
to.
Broadway plays, and yeah, and you've got a good airport hub. But yeah, it's other than that, I mean, you
Well, and in fact, of course, the interesting thing is, you've got a lot of, very wealthy people who live in Connecticut, but Connecticut's a blue state as well. So it's, even though it may be better than New York City itself, it still has a lot of downsides. So I think more and more people are saying, wait a minute, if Florida can become, a little more interesting in terms of its cultural offerings, which it seems like it is, then maybe they will, magnetically draw many more wealthy people to live there. And of course, the climate is much better as well. Although with Florida, you've got to deal with hurricanes and humidity. But again, if you've got $50 million, you can, when the hot summers hit in Florida,
yes,
you can go someplace. You can go up to Maine, right? So there seem to be an awful lot of people who now split their time between Maine and Florida. And why stop off at New York City in the middle of that?
yeah, but then you've got Warren Buffett out in Omaha, so it's
True, although he's I think quite the exception to the rule, and kind of like I guess most of the Walton family is perhaps still out in Arkansas. So you've got some of those exceptions, but yeah, a lot of wealthy people obviously are concentrated in a few parts of the country.
yeah, the Walton family. Yeah, I don't know if they're still in Arkansas. It's a yeah, and but that's something too. That is, I mean, New York apparently still has the most billionaires of any city. I mean, I don't know why they're not coming together, but I'm also amazed at just how many billionaires actually support this garbage. Dan, what's up with that?
Well, again, if you're a billionaire, though, I mean, you can afford to lose, tens of millions of dollars and barely take note of it. So, they've got, so much going on for themselves that even if you have a socialist government, they can endure it. It's the people, further down, the people who are actually trying to rise, who are trying to, make a living at much lower levels, who are going to get screwed over by a Mamdani government because they can't afford to have their taxes go up by, 30% or 50% or whatever. And we're not talking about the really poor, but we're
Yeah,
talking about, the enterprising small businessmen. And, they're the people I worry about the most in New York. And obviously, you have a whole set of conditions from COVID through to developments in the real estate market that have been absolutely
yeah.
devastating for small business people.
Oh yeah,
And we see this in Washington, D.C., where I live as well, that, restaurants, for example, are closing left and right because the rents have gone up, even though the customer bases have fallen. And you've got new requirements on minimum wages for waiters and other things. And so the burden on businesses has just increased, steadily, and
yeah.
it's become unbearable. And you're seeing the results of that. So now you've got all these empty storefronts, and now I mean, you see empty storefronts even in Manhattan now, which you would never have seen in the past. And you certainly see them in Washington D.C. So the anti-business environment in our big cities is a major scandal.
Yeah, I had Justin Zuckerman on talking about that, the minimum wage law in DC, and he said, he said the restaurant employees were against it, the restaurant owners were against it, but it was just a bunch of busybody do-gooders who went out and did it, and then they got on the ballot and it got voted in. It's
Yep. And I think that's what Mamdani is all about as well. I
yeah,
think that, an awful lot of people really do not want Mamdani to be mayor, but the Democratic primary base did. And, once he's got that nomination, the Democratic machine in New York is strong enough that it almost guarantees him to become mayor.
yeah, and Michael Malice talks about how New York had all these long, old, very ethnic businesses that were just part of the character of New York City, and they all just got destroyed by the coronavirus policies.
Yep.
The old restaurants or the old it really and New York has a lot of I haven't been to New York in a long time, but it certainly has a still very interesting character. It's
Oh yeah, I like New York
yeah,
a great deal, but
yeah.
even just as a visitor, you can see the difference between pre-COVID and post-COVID, and I fear that Mamdani will be as disastrous for the city as COVID itself was.
Who do you think has a chance? I mean, what about Curtis Sliwa? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, he has the Republican nomination, and he's the founder of the Guardian Angels, and
Yeah.
he's someone who, has been a New York figure for several decades now. I like him a lot, but unfortunately, he has no chance whatsoever. And at least that's the feeling among everyone I talk to in New York, and even the Republican Party is, perhaps not, all that enthusiastic, and considered him kind of a token candidate. And I think that's a great shame and a pity because I think he's a good guy, but unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be a credible, challenge to Mamdani.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, he went out and did the work and built it. He knows how to build an organization and get people to volunteer. So that's one thing he's got. But yeah, I don't know where New York's. Yeah, getting back to the subject about primaries, running against people in the primary. What do you think is going to happen with Thomas Massey? I mean,
I think he'll probably come through and survive a primary challenge. He seems to be very well liked by his constituency, and he has survived attacks on him before. So I would not expect him to be in grave danger. And if anything, if Musk follows my advice and actually puts his resources into Republican primaries, he's someone, of course, Musk should be defending in the primaries. So, and the more challenges, because that's the other thing too, is that keep in mind, money is always a limited resource, and the establishment only has a limited amount of funds. Even though they're very deep funds, they're still finite. And that means if they have to defend a lot of primaries, defend a lot of awful congressmen in primaries across the country, then they have less money to put into challenging Thomas Massey in Kentucky. And I think that, again, is a good reason for Elon Musk to put pressure on the Republican Party from the primary direction rather than from a third party.
yeah. Who do you think were some of the big villains in all this?
Uh, Well, I mean, the Republican leadership in general doesn't have a great commitment to smaller government, and they just want to minimize the headaches. They want to keep their team together, and they want to get their members reelected. And their members, again, want to avoid any kind of controversy and just get reelected on the weakest possible platform. Now that said, I actually, when I finally went and looked closely at the big beautiful bill, which was a couple of weeks ago, I actually came away liking it better than I expected it to. And I think that the tax cuts are more important than controlling the deficit. The deficit is certainly a big problem, but making sure that Americans are able to keep more of the money they earn is actually the higher priority. And some of the new spending, which is not the main thing that's contributing to the deficit, that's also justifiable, especially when it comes to border protection. And finally, I think conservatives and libertarians should be happy with a lot of the cuts that are being made to the welfare state in the big beautiful bill, and that you actually do have some good reductions, about $1 trillion worth or more, that are coming through some restructuring of Medicaid and other programs, and in some cases programs are being returned to the states. All that's actually very good.
Mhm.
The trouble is, the good things about the big beautiful bill should only be a starting point. They should not be the end point, and the Republicans can't rest on their laurels at this stage. They should be going further and trying to actually get the deficit and the size of government under control. But that's going to take some time. And really, I think the moment when Doge could have its greatest effect is probably past. And hopefully, if the Republicans do hold on control of Congress after next year's midterms, then perhaps they can do something, after that. But even then, there's going to be a lot of pressure, of course. A lot of momentum in politics is going to be looking to the 2028 presidential election, and it's not going to be looking so much at things that Congress would be doing in 2027.
Do you think JD Vance will be the nominee in 2028? Do you think anybody else might come out of the woodwork?
Yeah, I think JD Vance is in the right position to become the nominee, and he's got the leg up, so to speak. If for some reason Vance suddenly decided he didn't want to run, I think Marco Rubio has certainly increased his stock within the party and would be a name brand that would be very powerful. And then beyond that, I don't think there are too many Republicans who really are in kind of the top tier of contenders for 2028. I think Ron DeSantis, his brand has fallen a little bit, recently, partly because of his clash with Donald Trump, and that, of course, has kind of made a lot of Trump supporters very anti-DeSantis. But then also within Florida, DeSantis has started to have more troubles with the Florida legislature, and there are also troubles with, some of the funding that went to a charity that his wife is involved with have, been questioned, and so. DeSantis right now seems less likely for 2028 than he might have seemed before he ran for president in 2024.
That makes me wonder, what does he do? I mean, one thing I've always heard about DeSantis is they always say, and this is important for Floridians, he's a good hurricane governor.
Hmm. I think that's probably true. I think DeSantis is having a good effect in terms of changing parts, at least, of the Florida education system and the Florida higher education and university system in particular. Although it's it's an uphill battle, and there's constant temptations on the part of a lot of appointees to backslide and to sort of go back into the mainstream. But if DeSantis is able to succeed in creating a university system in Florida that is free from all of these woke corruptions that we see, both in private and public universities all across the country, that's going to be a really big success that a lot of people will look to in the future and say, if he can do it there, maybe he can do it on the national scale as well. Obviously, we don't have national universities in the same way we have state universities, but it would definitely, be a bellwether. It would definitely be a signal that a lot of other people would start to follow, and I think that would give DeSantis, a lot of credibility.
That would be huge. I'm even hearing inklings about Texas A&M going blue. It's a really tough call. I mean, the only national universities we have, really, are the service academies. So I don't know. I don't know where we go from there on the colleges. It's
Yeah, although I will say that the pressure that Trump is putting on Harvard and other Ivy Leagues and other universities in general is bearing some fruit. And admittedly, not everything that Trump is pushing on is entirely good, but overall, he's absolutely right to put pressure on these colleges and universities and to take away a lot of their federal funding. And it's been very interesting. I mean, even the uh, president or the leader of the University of Virginia recently had to step down because of the pressure that Trump had put on him and the university. So, heads are starting to roll in higher education, and that in itself is a good thing, and hopefully will create administrators in particular who are a little bit more aware of the need for their institutions to have more balance and not simply to be bastions of hard left ideology.
Oh yes, indeed. I mean, even I have to wonder what Mr. Jefferson would think of his university now. It's but and but also some of these like Harvard's still one of the richest corporations in the world. I mean, I don't know how much they're really going to be hit by that, and in some
Yeah,
cases,
they have an endowment of $53 billion, so
yeah,
they can afford to lose $400 million in federal funding and still survive quite well. So, which again, kind of quite apart from all the ideological questions, simply as a matter of what is the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars, what's appropriate in terms of adding to our enormous deficit and debt. Is giving more money to an institution that's $53 billion in the bank, does that make sense? Should they be getting taxpayer money at all?
yeah,
I think it's a pretty serious question.
yeah. It most certainly has. Of course, from what I hear, the research usually goes to the researcher, not necessarily the school. But yeah, there's a lot of money out there. I mean,
Well, and the school has the money to give to the researcher, right? So, I mean, it doesn't have to come from the federal government. Again, this fundamental libertarian point that government has no money of its own. It's always taking the money in the form of taxes or selling, government debt. But the money is always coming from the public. It's always coming from other people and other institutions. And basically, the public and other institutions, they could just eliminate the middleman, eliminate the government, and take that money and put more of that money to direct good uses rather than having the government
yeah,
take it and then recirculate it. And yet we treat it as if this is unimaginable, as if government doesn't do it, then nobody can do it. As if government isn't, leading research, then universities can't fund it themselves, or corporations can't fund it themselves, or even, potentially nonprofits or other kinds of organizations. We've given up on this fundamental American idea that we have to do things for ourselves rather than having the federal government do them for us. And that I think is a very dangerous development.
yeah. I mean, when you think about all the discoveries that somebody like Edison or Benjamin Franklin made, and I don't think they ever got any government funding, but it's I don't know that for sure. But yeah, it's really wild to see where we're going. Do you think we might see I do think Trump is probably election probably helped put the at least turn back this whole transgender nonsense. I mean, although I'm not convinced. Having watched the Berlin Wall fall, I'm never really truly convinced that anything is ever dead. But where do you think we're going to go with that?
Yeah, that seems to be something where we've had some real progress, and even the colleges and universities, even a lot of sort of sports leagues and other things, have started to say, okay, we're now going to take away some of these medals that were given to a man who was, beating women when they were, in swimming contests. Even a lot of institutions that are not controlled by conservatives or Republicans or libertarians have started to say, yes, we've gone too far. We see the backlash. And now we're not only going to stop doing more of that, but we're actually going to roll back some of the things we've already done. So that's promising, but you're exactly right. And you're right to, cite the Berlin Wall as an example. These battles are not won once and then, over forever. They're going to have to be fought again. And you also have to be vigilant. You have to ask yourself, how is it that we got into this insane situation in the first place? It was clearly because we were complacent and we let some very radical left wing notions not just get entertained, but actually seize power and make that power coercive over our society, over our universities, over our organizations. Over I'm an editor, I'm a writer. It burns me up that you have literary style guides and you have newspapers that I freelance for that say, oh no, here are the pronouns you have to use. Here's the language you have to change in order to conform to the new party line. I mean, that's the most Orwellian thing imaginable. That's straight out of 1984. And yet, it passes without comment or opposition in a lot of mainstream institutions. So that mentality of accepting, the demands of people who are very radical, that has to change.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely has changed. There's still a lot of people out there funding this. I mean, various billionaires. I don't really know what they're trying to accomplish. It's uh, the transgender movement was never a grassroots movement. It was always coming from the top down. Well, I don't know if there's anything else we really need to cover here. It's been a great talking to you. Have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I would just say to our viewers, please check out modernagejournal.com, which is the website I run. And it also has a print magazine, Modern Age, which I think many viewers would enjoy subscribing to. So visit modernagejournal.com and you'll find the details.
Yes, and down here in Texas, we are being reminded that there are people out there who truly are public servants. I mean, it's been pretty with about 100 people dead from all this flooding. It's and they're volunteers, and it's not been a good time though. So, well,
Yeah,
yeah, and so modernagejournal.com, you said.
that's correct.
Yeah, anywhere else we can find any other websites you want to mention?
Well, I'm usually to be found on the opinion pages of the New York Post about once a week, and if you go to Creators Syndicate, which is my where my syndicated column originates from, you can find my column every week there. It's also at Chronicles Magazine, so chroniclesmagazine.org, I think, is the URL.
Yes, Chronicles. Yeah. Okay. Well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack. You can donate at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, Daniel McCarthy. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.